Welcome to the Great New Zealand Real Estate Project. Today I had a fantastic chat with Miriam Chancellor, the founder and director of Naked Audience. And Miriam is an absolute expert when it comes to communication, and she teaches high-level executives across the country to improve their presentation skills and their public speaking skills. Miriam and I spoke about everything that we can do within the real estate industry to improve our communication with our vendors, and we even touched on things like how to overcome fears about getting in front of the camera, putting ourselves out there, and just improving what we do across the industry. So enjoy this conversation, but more importantly, this isn't about what we think, this is about what you think. So join the conversation and tell us what you think.
Okay. So, Ben, before we started recording, you picked up a stainless steel-ish looking straw and asked me if you minded if you hummed through it. To which you got a very quizzical look from me, wondering what on earth you were doing. So I feel like you need to explain yourself.
So I talk way too much, like way too much. I'm in a job where I'm on the phone all the time and I get a really sore voice. And it gets to the point where I can't even talk. Like it actually got to the point where they said that I had to have voice rest for 3 weeks, no talking at all. And then I was doing voice therapy. I had to do this humming and learn to resonate from the front when I talk. And then someone put me onto a straw.
Wow. And it's meant to what?
So when you blow through it, like what it does is it creates the resonance in the front, and it also lifts the vocal cords up a little bit and helps strengthen them. So
interesting. Yeah.
Makes me look like an idiot, but
it does. It was quite humorous. What the funny thing is, it makes me think of back to, because I used to do classical singing growing up, and we also had these crazy warm-up exercises that we did to warm the vocal cords. Like, what was some of them? To get the lips warmed up, and the which I don't even know. I'm just going to be appearing horribly on the audio right now, but basically that's bringing in the sound, so it's very forward as opposed to being back and more strained. So I actually wonder if, because usually if you're, it sounds strange to say if you're speaking correctly, but actually if you're speaking correctly and if you're producing the sound in the right way, it should be rare to lose your voice.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think for me, I don't talk correctly at all. And
interesting.
And I don't know why. I guess it's just something, the way I've spoken ever since I was a kid.
Yeah.
And now as an adult, when I'm overusing my voice, I then have to relearn how to speak.
Wow.
And so even now I can feel that it's at the back of my throat and I need to talk more like this kind of, but it's really hard to do.
Interesting. Wow, that's fascinating. Funny. Another example that comes to mind is when people get quite breathless when they speak.
Yeah. It's
often because they're not breathing correctly. So they're breathing with their shoulders, which is called chest breathing. And there's a lot of physical movement. And it actually means, even though there's a lot of physical movement happening, the breath intake is actually limited because you're only somewhat filling the tops of the lungs. So it's you're more likely to get breathless. But if you breathe with your diaphragm, which is a dome-shaped muscle underneath your rib cage or in your rib cage, it contracts when you breathe, and it means you get more oxygen per breath.
Yeah, right.
So, and it's the same type of breathing that opera singers use to project their voices to the backs of auditoriums, and also the same type of breathing people use to meditate. So it's that deep belly breathing or diaphragmatic breathing, which should help with breathlessness. Yeah,
and that's also what I got taught when I started going to voice therapy, is because they were saying that when I breathe up here as well, that creates stress on the vocal cords. And when I start breathing from my belly, then it actually relaxes the throat muscles rather than them being tight the whole time.
Yeah, interesting. I often say the breath is the fuel of the voice. Yeah, and you've got to put in the right fuel.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. So obviously you are a expert in public speaking and teaching people how to speak. And
I'm glad that's obvious. I'm glad you do use that term, obviously.
Obviously, yes, you'd hope so. And, we actually met when we were at Toastmasters in Auckland Toastmasters because for me, it's always been a challenge getting in front of a camera. I mean, the fact that I'm even doing it now is crazy for me. I'm like, what am I doing?
Which is awesome that you're doing it, right?
But there's things to be talked about in the real estate industry, so I put myself out there. But for someone like yourself, you train people in, especially CEOs and people in the executive space, and everybody ultimately is looking to improve their public speaking, or they have a fear of public speaking or getting in front of the camera. And real estate is moving in that direction as well, because people are doing a lot more video content to be more engaging. So have you noticed anything from real estate videos that you've seen versus what you see in, I guess, the more corporate world?
Yes. So, I mean, again, I've only got a superficial understanding of the real estate industry, and I can only comment on what I've seen, which is somewhat limited. We did buy a house a year ago. Maybe even, coming up 2 years ago now. And through that, I was obviously exposed to real estate agents in the period that we were looking for a house and then buying a house. One thing that I'd say is probably a stark difference is when you see real estate agents out there doing their thing, whether it's on video or whether it's at an open home, you get the impression on average, and I understand this is a generalization, but they are wanting to portray a certain image. That image is a very polished, it is maybe a little bit more of your old salesman approach, with all the suit and the tie and the perfect hairdo and the perfect voice. It's very, lovely to listen to. And hi, how are you doing? What are you looking for today? How can I help you? Are you okay? That kind of persona comes through. Whereas in the corporate space, I think there is this big shift towards, and I'm wary of using this term because it is becoming a bit of a buzzword, an authentic approach. So less about this polished persona and more about an authentic you as an individual. So that's, in my mind, is probably the biggest difference that I've observed between those two spaces.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because in real estate, I would say a lot of people view the industry as a whole and would probably say it's not the most relatable industry in terms of what they think a real estate agent is and who they are as a person versus some of the value they actually add to people's lives. And so interesting that you've observed that as well, that there's this salesperson kind of look.
Yeah, and I get that that's the case, and I think there is value for that to an extent. So one thing, in fact, I was talking about this yesterday with a group of professionals about what is public speaking. If we look at what it is made up of, it's made up of composition, conversation, and performance. So composition refers to an oral or written work. It's prepared. It's the way you craft your messaging. It's the flow of ideas. It's the supporting examples and stories. It's any statistics that you might have to strengthen your argument. And it implies a certain level of preparation. Conversation is more of that authentic, personal touch of, hey, I'm responding to you in this moment. In fact, one of the greatest compliments a speaker can be given is being told that they are conversational, because it implies that they are speaking to their audience like they would a friend, right? So it's very natural. And then you've got performance, which is all about delivery. So the way we use our voice, the way we use our body language to communicate a message. The sad thing is performance has received a bit of bad rap in recent years because of this emphasis on, I think, authenticity, which says, oh, actually, so forget about performance because that's just the phony stuff. Right. And if you're performing, or if you're using your voice and body in a particular way to create a different effect, a certain effect, then that's actually not authentic, which is not necessarily true. And actually, if you think about the importance of performance, if you were to go to, it transcends the basic it transcends the basic exchange of information. So if you, for instance, were to go to a real estate conference, and let's say your business partner couldn't attend, but she was really excited for you to see this one headline speaker speak. She missed out. You went. On Monday morning, she asks you, how was the headline speaker? What was he like? And you say, you just had to be there. So that's the performance element, that even if you relayed all the information that he shared, that performance piece is just in and of the moment. You can't really explain that.
Someone else can't necessarily replicate it in and of themselves.
Exactly. Well, yeah, I mean, they could, but it's that added element that creates engagement and intrigue. I mean, if we weren't concerned with performance, we'd just read all the information online because it's out there.
Yeah, right.
But that's why we like speakers, is because they engage us and they incorporate those types of effects. Now, all this to say, going back to your point, I think agents have that performance element probably in bucket loads, maybe too much. But yeah, the corporate space doesn't tend to have that as much. But I think we need it to an extent, because when we hear a speaker or when we encounter an agent, we do have certain levels of expectations in terms of how they're going to behave in a particular scenario. For a speaker, it's, well, I want to be engaged, so I expect them to be engaging and use their voice and body and be charismatic. For a agent, probably you could say, well, I expect them to be polished and courteous, and maybe we do expect them to be a bit of a salesman. I don't know. So that was quite a long-winded way to say there is value in still putting care and thought into the way we present and hold ourselves.
Yeah, right. So it doesn't have to fully just be the selfie video so that you're super relatable, walking through a house and going, hey, here I am at the house.
Yeah,
but there's probably a time and a place.
Yeah, and I think, and then that's bringing in a whole different aspect to it, which is style. People have different styles, and that's great. That's what keeps the world interesting, right? So that might work really well for one agent, but it might not work well for another. So that's another part of the equation as well, is identifying the style and not necessarily just trying to replicate what everyone else is doing, because then you might just come across as a second-rate version of someone else.
Yeah, right. I mean, there's definitely those agents who, there's the funny agent and all their videos are funny, and then there's the serious agent, and then there's the agent who's trying to copy people. I
exactly.
guess.
Well, what agent are you, Ben?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. I haven't actually done a lot of videos myself when I was selling real estate, because it was pre video taking off, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are your agents like? Do you have a balance between them, or how would you describe?
So I guess for us, one of the things that we do is we try to focus on the differentiation between agents. So every single agent has a different way of communicating in the public. They've got a different brand. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And so it's about creating their brand story in the marketplace and who they are, what their personal values are, how do they want to communicate, and we kind of build it up from there. And that would dictate what kind of videos they're going to be doing, or at least the primary form of video, because I think there is a time and a place for different types of communication. So for example, if you're doing a Facebook video, it's probably a different platform than TikTok, where if you tried to do a polished video on TikTok, nobody wants to watch it.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Yeah, so it's recognizing that different channels require a different approach.
Yeah.
Right? And in the same way that the way we present on camera is even potentially going to be slightly different to the way we present in person.
Yeah.
In fact, just to give you a recent example of that, I was just doing some filming for someone recently, and it's amazing how much camera work lessens energy.
Right.
It sucks it out of you. So if you're presenting in front of a camera, you might think, oh, this is quite animated and exuberant and full of personality. But when you watch it back, you may surprise yourself and come across as quite serious. So you really, in order to create interest and engagement, have to up the ante a bit with your personality on camera. Now, that's not saying you're being inauthentic, which some people, might think. It just means, as I was saying before, you recognize that in order to bring out the best version of you, some channels require a slightly different approach. It's like knowing your audience. The way you speak to an elderly couple selling their family home that they've had in the family for decades is going to be probably quite different to the way you communicate with a buyer who's looking to buy a townhouse for him.
Or a first home or something.
Yeah, first home. Yeah. So it's just recognizing that different channels or different audiences may require a slightly different approach.
Yeah, I like that idea because I know for myself when I've been getting in front of the camera more and more, I think it's something that I'm working on is becoming more animated and more expressive. And even as you're saying that, I'm like, yeah, I probably come across like I'm just sitting and like staring with this deadpan look. Well, and it's like, I should be like, hey, Miriam, yes, wow. And then it's going to come across way more interesting for viewers. And it's not because I'm not being myself. It's because the camera, like you said, it creates this false, I don't know, it sucks the energy out almost. It mutes you. So you have to exaggerate it.
Why don't we do an experiment right now, right? So the cameras are rolling. So how I would typically speak to you in person would be probably like this. We'd be sitting here. I'd say, hey, Ben, how are you doing today? Love your straw technique. This is a great setup you have going here for the podcast. And how would you talk to me back?
And I'd be like, oh, yeah, it's good. I don't know, the straw thing that was
But random.
Yeah. And I'd kind of do that.
Okay, so now the cameras have recorded that aspect. As an experiment, now we're going to ham it up a bit. And as you go back and edit these videos, you can just see the comparison. So this is how I would typically, if I know I'm on camera, this is how I would typically speak. So before we were talking about the difference between performance, composition, and conversation. So those are really the elements of effective public speaking. And together as a speaker, we need to think about balancing those performance, composition, and conversation. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean we blah, 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 blah. So that was a lot more. Now, to me, that felt super theatrical, OTT. It probably sensed that way to you as well.
But way more engaging.
Okay, that's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what it's actually like on the camera now.
Totally.
Because my gauge of that was, oh man, that was so OTT. I wonder what it's going to come across on the camera. So now I want to challenge you. So tell me about your morning this morning and sorting out some of the setup here. But I want you to tell it like you're a kids presenter. Okay?
All right. A kids presenter.
Yeah. So first tell me the problem that you encountered this morning and then what you did to solve that problem, but through a child's presenter's level of energy.
Yeah. Okay. All right. It's making me nervous. I gotta act now. This is that.
Yeah. No, it's not act.
No, not act.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's saying, Ben, we need more of you coming through.
Yeah, right.
Because otherwise we're going to get less of you through the camera.
Yeah.
And so take a moment.
So I'd be like, oh, Miriam, you wouldn't believe what happened this morning. So actually it started yesterday. I was doing a test run for the podcast. Obviously this is one of the first ones. And I was using one camera and I found out that, we'd be sitting across like this and the camera's just looking from one side. So all you see is this profile view of me, right?
Yeah.
And the whole thing wasn't working. So I was up till 9 o'clock last night. Oh, that's not even late, but I get up early, okay? So I was up late last night for me and I realized that I'm going to have to get a new camera. You're coming in at 10 o'clock this morning. And so I'm going to have to get to the shops, buy a new camera, set it up, change the entire studio. Only yesterday we had a green screen sitting right here.
Yeah.
And now we're sitting across from each other, which is more engaging. But it was so stressful. Like, honestly, you got here and I was still setting up. And then I was like, I hope she doesn't mind.
Yeah, great.
Is it going to be all right? But it worked out.
Awesome. How did that feel?
Much better.
Interesting. Okay, so that felt good.
But also, I think for me as well, because I have this whole voice thing, it's like I feel like I stress my voice doing that. So I think I have to work out how to do it properly so that I'm not stressing my voice.
Yeah, interesting. So yeah, that's a whole different thing to figure out. That's a separate issue.
But I also felt like I sped up a lot and I was like, I don't know if that's a good thing or not.
Yeah, so you were probably quite fast and maybe I was quite fast as well. And that probably makes sense, right? Because we think if we're animated, then we're in a heightened state. And so we just want to get through it so really quickly, So that's a really good point that if you're being more if you're speaking with more energy, it doesn't necessarily mean you're speaking really quickly. So being mindful of that. But interestingly, even to me, that wasn't coming across as...
It's still not that extreme.
It's still not extreme.
Because for me, like when I was younger, I had, this is getting a bit personal, but why not? When I was at school, I had teachers and they actually said to me in class that they don't like my voice. And I was like, oh, and this is like a little kid, right? And I've got over it now, hence why I don't mind sharing it. But it meant that I went from being expressive to like really flat. And now I have to relearn to actually allow myself to express things without someone shutting me down, right?
Wow.
And so it's building up that confidence again, and then going on a camera or something, that's like another element again. And I think that for a lot of people, getting in front of the camera and going, I have to look a certain way or feel a certain way is a real challenge. But even doing something like this where you're practicing, it's like, it makes it a lot easier, right?
Yeah, and go for it.
I was going to say, you just have to practice over and over and over again. Like even now I'm like, I should talk more like this just after that little thing. Yeah. It's like it suddenly helps lift it, you know?
It does. It does help lift it. And before, I mean, we were even just saying before we started recording that when you know there's something recording, we tend to go inward and we automatically become more formal or just...
You don't want to move around or feel, you kind of stiffen up a bit.
You stiffen up, stiffen up in every way, physically and through the voice and in your facial expressions. So it's almost like when you start record, if you can just or do something to get you out of your head. Yeah. And sometimes I make some of the clients I work with do that. I'm like, I want you to go out of the room. No one's listening. No one can see you out there. No one can hear you. And I want you to just do something utterly crazy with your voice and body, basically having a shakeout, then come back and reset. And it's like they're shaking out the nervous energy.
Yeah.
So that can be quite helpful. Obviously, you might not be able to do that if you're in public and doing some recording. But if you do have the luxury of time and a private space, then I think it's a big helper. And also acknowledging especially if you're starting out, unless you're doing something live or needing it in a first take, you're probably not going to get it in the first take. So accept that and have a couple of run-throughs before you click record, and then you're far more likely and going to save yourself some time and energy of going through all the different recordings that didn't work. You're more likely to get it right on an earlier recording if you practice beforehand.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, for me, when I went to Toastmasters and started learning a bit more about public speaking and getting past the nerves and that sort of thing, I would write my speech down, which I guess for a real estate agent would be like writing the script for what they're going to say in front of the camera. And then I would practice it and practice it and practice it until I knew every single word and I could say it. And then I practiced until it became natural where I didn't have to think about it. So I could start adding, body language to it, so to speak, and looking at the pace, and then I would speak, and then it came across okay. But then as I've improved my public speaking, I've got to the point where in a lot of cases, it's just bullet points, and then I can come across more natural, and I just speak. And so there's almost like at least for me, there was a progression of writing, memorizing, then moving to bullet points, and now I'm doing something where it has to be totally off the cuff. I don't know, I might screw up and say something stupid, and then it's going to end up on the camera in front of everybody.
I'm so glad you brought that up because that was I completely relate to that progression of experience and the shifting approach as you gain more confidence. And I don't take issue with that. I take issue with competent speakers or top professionals constantly memorizing and never challenge themselves to go beyond that, because ultimately that should... The end goal is to do what you've described, is be able to have a couple of bullet points and speak somewhat extemporaneously, somewhat off the cuff, and just trust that you know what you're talking about. Now, that doesn't mean not prepping, and we can talk about prep if that's of interest a bit later. But I've seen many people stick with the memorization approach because there's comfort and security in that. That doesn't work ultimately for three reasons. One, it's time consuming to memorize word for word. Two, if you lose your place, you're screwed because our memories learn sequentially. And 3, you're more likely to come across as quite robotic. I've often said to more junior speakers who are starting out in Toastmasters or in the professional world, or if they're starting to do more video work, at that stage, their goal is just to get more confidence. So I don't take much issue with them memorizing things for now. If it's going to make them get that experience under their belt, start to feel more confident in their own skin, start to feel more confident on camera and in front of an audience, as long as the goal is to eventually move beyond that to the bullet point approach, which we spoke about. So I think absolutely that's quite a effective way to get people starting to get used to public speaking, whether it's on camera or in person.
Yeah, right. And so say for a real estate agent, they are new to the industry maybe, or maybe they're going, I'm going to step up my game and I'm going to try video content. What would be some things that they could think about, or say, what are some things they could do firstly just to take the pressure off themselves?
Can you explain further? So
they're, it's their first time with someone who's going to be filming them. There's a camera in their face. It's pretty daunting, and they have to talk about this property and they want to come across like themselves. But I know for me, first time I had a camera in my face, I was like, oh, and I became, so stiff.
Yeah.
And so is there any mental techniques, I guess, to help yourself relax?
Yeah, well, mental techniques we could come to in a sec, just in terms of practical techniques. First, I think it's important to acknowledge that you're always going to be more critical of yourself than anyone else is. That's a hurdle that you just need to overcome. Easier said than done, obviously, but acknowledge that that's going to be the case. Secondly, and we've already touched on it before, rehearsing beforehand, practicing the script before you click record. But then when you do the recording, watch back and review yourself with a somewhat critical but also kind eye and say, okay, this is what I'm doing well, this is what I can improve on. And you may start to notice you're doing things that you didn't realize you were doing, like doing a strange hand gesture or fidgeting with something. Funny enough, I worked with someone who wore glasses, and he didn't realize that every 2 sentences or so, he would push his glasses up his nose, even though they weren't slipping down.
Right. It was just a habit.
It was just a habit. And it was so distracting. And because he came and did the course, and I mean, there was obviously other things that we were working on, but he became aware of that. And once he became self-aware, he was able to correct that behavior. Right. But you can't correct behavior unless you become self-aware. And how do you become self-aware? But through watching yourself back on camera or going to Toastmasters and getting that type of feedback.
Yeah.
In terms of other techniques, in terms of mental frameworks now, if we just talk about that, one thing, and this kind of goes back to what we were saying before about you're going to be more critical of yourself than anyone else's. When I was starting out in speaking, I used to be overly concerned with what people thought of me. And that's quite a common fear when it comes to public speaking, is a fear of judgment, a fear of failure, a fear of not being good enough. And one way I managed that was to come up with a truth statement that debunks the core fear. So if fear of judgment was the fear, maybe the core fear might be a what if, like what if I say the wrong thing and my audience doesn't like me? Or what if I don't sound intelligent and I lose credibility? So that might be the core fear. But actually, most of those core fears are pretty irrational. The chance of them happening is very low. And I had this epiphany, I don't remember where or when, but I had this realization that my audience doesn't care about me as much as I would like to think.
Right.
And so when I got confronted with an audience or a camera, and it's now become so ingrained that I don't even conscientize it, but earlier on, if those anxieties started coming into play, I would tell myself, don't flatter yourself, Miriam. Your audience doesn't care about you as much as you would like to think. So that worked for me. And for other people, it could be just asking yourself, when I imagine myself up in front of an audience or in front of a camera or in front of people at an open home, whatever it might be, what am I actually afraid of? Then what is the what if behind that fear? What if I forget my lines? What if they don't like me? What if I say the wrong thing? What if I give them the wrong information? And then come up with a statement of truth that debunks that core fear. So to give you some other truth statements, that was my one I explained earlier. There's also, this is going to be over very soon. I may as well enjoy myself. It could be, I'm prepared. Whatever happens, I can navigate the situation back on track. My audience wants me to do well. I was chosen for this task, or I'm here for a reason, so I have something to offer. Or this is not about me, this is giving my audience or clients or vendors something of value. So those are all examples of truth statements, but what one you use will depend on what you as an individual are afraid of. So I'm just thinking, Ben, for you, it might be related to, it might be something to do with the voice. If you were given that negative and probably unhelpful critique as a child, that would stunt your confidence potentially in some ways. So it might be, well, let's go through the exercise. What are you afraid of?
Yeah, well, actually, can I share something around what's helped me with it? Because it's very similar to what you're talking about.
Love
it. When I started to deal with this fear of public speaking, fear of getting in front of a camera, all of that kind of stuff, I did this. I actually ended up writing a speech about it, and it was this idea. It's on this concept: perfect love casts out all fear, and it's a statement that I love personally, and it's this idea that if you can inject love without getting too wishy-washy, then that's what will remove the fear. So if I for example, I feared public speaking because I would worry about what people think of me. And that probably stemmed from that childhood thing of the teacher going, I don't like your voice. And then suddenly I was like, oh, people think this of me and I don't like that. And so now I have this fear of what people think of me. So whenever I'm putting myself out there publicly or whatever, I have this fear of what people think of me. Now, when I came across this whole perfect love casts out all fear thing, it was, if I know that my value is not determined by what people think of me because I have an intrinsic worth, then even if I screw up, or even if my voice sucks, or even if I say the worst speech of my life, it doesn't impact my value.
No.
And that had a huge impact on my ability to then move forward, because suddenly I was able to get up in front of people and go, oh, blah, 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 blah. And it took time. Like when I first started, I would have panic attacks.
Wow.
Like I literally, in fact, there was this one time I was training real estate agents at Unitech about how to prospect and how to build their business.
Wow.
And I got up and I went to start speaking, and this was the first time it had happened.
Wow.
And I just froze. I couldn't breathe. And I was in front of all these students, and I was meant to be this confident real estate agent teaching people how to prospect and build their business. And I literally just froze, and I was like, oh. And I had to turn around. I was like, sorry. I stopped. And then I ended up just focusing on my breathing, because I realized I wasn't breathing. I was going to pass out or something.
Wow.
And then eventually I started talking and I got over it. But that's where I was with public speaking. And then as I realized that my value doesn't come from what those people think, like I left that room and I've never seen any of them again. Yeah. They've probably forgotten it.
Oh, they have.
Right?
They forgot about it like 10 minutes after, maybe not 10 minutes, but.
And they were probably just like, oh, that was a bit weird. Okay, carry on with my life.
Yeah.
And when I had that realization that my value is not determined by those people, that's what had a huge impact on overcoming that fear.
Amazing. So good to hear that. And actually, you've reminded me of something my mum used to say to us kids growing up, and which is very similar, but it's an encapsulation of what you've just said. Your worth and value is not in the hands of other people.
Yeah. And
when it comes to speaking, you've already mentioned it, the only person that's going to obsess over a mistake or error that you make is you. Everyone gets on with their lives, which goes back to the truth statement that worked for me. Yeah. They don't care about you as much as you might like to think. So why worry? But you're right. It is a bit of a it is a bit of a journey. And yeah, I'm sorry to hear that was an experience you've had, because it's so unpleasant when it happens, isn't it? In the moment.
It absolutely is. And you're like, you walk out of there so embarrassed. But then once you get over that, it's so much better.
What I admire about that is that you had that experience and you recognized, okay, I need to do something about this. Not what I think many people would do is, I'm not good at this, I'm going to avoid public speaking going forward. I think there's probably a big temptation for those that have had a negative experience. And I know this because I've worked with people who have only just come around to the idea of the fact that they need to address their anxieties when it comes to public speaking, is that, people avoid it if they have a negative experience. Got countless examples of that. So awesome that you're a bit of a success story, because you've gone from being incredibly anxious to being an incredibly confident speaker. And for what it's worth, Ben, I think you have a lovely voice.
Thank you.
I do.
I'll probably watch this and I'll be like, oh.
I know, it's funny. Well, actually, I'm not a technical whiz, so I don't necessarily understand the acoustics and all the technicalities of audio. But someone shared with me not so long ago that one of the reasons we don't like our voice back on camera is because we're hearing it as other people hear it, not as we hear it. So the way someone can fact check this, and I don't know how scientific it is, but I gather from what this person said that the way when we speak, we hear our voice partly through our resonators in our face and through our, bone structure. But when we hear ourselves back on camera, we're hearing ourselves as other people would, which is out into the open and in the room environment. So our dislike for our own voice when we hear it on camera is not so much necessarily my voice sounds bad. It sounds different to what I'm used to hearing. Yeah. So it sounds strange. But yeah, I don't know how scientific it is, but it sounds about right.
It actually lines up with a music theory that I have. And it's this idea that I just have this idea, and no science behind it whatsoever, but it lines up with what you're saying, is this idea that our brains somehow like patterns. And so you create this pattern and eventually your brain is like, okay, cool, I like this thing now. And I've always had this idea in music that there's all these different genres, and people people are like, I don't like country music, or I don't like rock or whatever, but it's because they haven't been exposed to it enough. And so I challenged myself actually, because say country music, it's like this American thing and it's got nothing to do with New Zealand, and a lot of people hassle people who like country music. Yeah. And so I was like, I'm going to challenge myself with this theory, and I'm going to listen to country music for 3 months and only country.
Wow.
And I just wanted to test this theory and to see if I started liking it.
And?
Now I love it.
No way!
It's probably one of my favorite genres now. I hate to say it. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay. Out of interest, this is so interesting. And I've got a couple of things to add here. Did you, parallel to just exposing yourself to the music, did you also learn about where it came from, or was it purely just musical?
I think through listening to the music, I got a good feel for the culture of country.
Yeah.
And then I started looking into it. Now, I've been to Nashville now and things like that.
Whoa! So, when did this happen?
Probably 4 or 5 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But I've also done the same with other genres as well. So for me, I like pretty much everything from classical, rock, country, hip hop, R&B, rap, whatever, I like everything.
Yeah. I so admire that, because that's acknowledging that opinions and preferences change over time. Whereas I think people like to be quite staunch in their current preferences. In fact, there's this great thing called the end of history illusion, which is basically says that human beings are really bad at predicting what their preferences are going to be in 10 years' time. We think, in other words, we have reached the end of history now. Now I have got to the state of, settling in my preferences and values. And
I've figured it all out.
And I've figured it all out. But it only takes looking back to where you were 10 years ago to realize that that can't be true, that we're constantly molding. And sure, I think values would be far more set in stone, but certainly preference and opinions are open to be changed. And what I like that you've done is you've acknowledged that, okay, well, maybe my opinion will change if I expose myself to something, which completely opens this bigger topic up of, imagine if, I don't know, politicians stood in the shoes of their opponents and really sought to understand where they were coming from and their opinions and backgrounds, or different cultures. If I might not like living in, I don't know, Japan, but what if I really made an effort to understand the Japanese culture and the way they do things and went and lived there? I'm sure over time I'd become more excited about that. Right?
Yeah, and at the very least you would find parts of whatever it is that you're exploring that you can at the very least appreciate, and then you start to enjoy kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's interesting. I specifically on the music thing, because I'm outside of work. I play the piano quite regularly. And at Christmas this year, I made a point of acknowledging my dad in front of our family, because I'd had this epiphany the night before that I get so much enjoyment out of music, not just playing now, which I do a lot of at this stage of my life, but also just listening, and similarly listening to a variety of genres. Now, to be fair, I listen mostly to jazz these days, but still I've got the sense of appreciation for all these other genres because my dad made a point of exposing me to them when I was younger. So he'd play every genre under the sun for us just in the home all the time. And that gives you the sense of awareness and appreciation for these different types of music. So yeah, I think it's fascinating. So if there's, I mean, what's the challenge here? If there's something that you don't like, maybe learn about it and expose yourself to it and see what changes.
Yeah, and then I'm thinking, how do we relate this to real estate? I'm sure
we've got to bring the conversation back to focus.
And I'm sure there's a lot of people who have misconceptions about real estate agents, and maybe it's a case of getting more exposure to agents and getting to know them as people first.
Yeah.
And even from an agent's perspective, I think this idea of getting to know the person that you're representing and why they're selling, because I've had times where, I've got an offer on the table for a property and the owner's going, nope, I'm only taking this much money. And I know it's a good offer, but I find myself getting frustrated because I want to be able to communicate to this person that, this is a good offer in this market. And I know because I've been working in this my whole life, and this person's going, nope, this is all I'm accepting.
Wow.
And so there's this idea of like, how do I communicate to that person that this is a good offer? But I think as an agent, I need to understand their experience and understand why they are at that level, because it could impact their whole life, right? Because, they might be moving house because they've just lost their job, or they've just got married or had a new baby or something. And so they might be sticking to that price for a reason that they might not have communicated yet, because it takes a while to build trust. But understanding them might at least give me that appreciation and then value for why they're coming from that place.
And people, it's a very core or primitive, whatever you want to call it, need that we all have, and that is to be understood. So if you're just coming in with your agent lens and saying, no, this is unrealistic because of A, B, and C, that's going to be, in my mind, probably far less effective than getting alongside them saying, okay, so what is it about it that you think, why do you think you're going to, or maybe that's not appropriate interrogating them, why do you think you're going to get this much? But, getting an understanding of where they're coming from, basically. And as you say, stepping in their shoes and building that rapport so they trust you, so that when you say, well, actually, this is all you're probably going to get realistically in this market, they see you as a subject matter expert, as a trustworthy person, and think, oh, okay, maybe Ben is right in this scenario. Now, that is simplifying things drastically, but...
Yeah, it's a good topic, though, because at the moment, the market has slowed down a lot, and vendors, sellers, their expectations, they're starting to adjust now, but, for a long time, they've been relatively high, and buyers are not prepared to pay as much. Real estate agents often look like the bad guy because they're communicating something that someone doesn't want to hear, but it actually might be good advice. And so I guess as a communications expert, if someone is needing to deliver news that's not so, appealing to hear, for lack of better words, what are some techniques that someone can use? Like I'm thinking Chris Voss type of stuff.
Yeah, so Chris Voss, he was the author of
Never Split the Difference.
Never Split the Difference, that's right. I listened to that audiobook a while ago. Well, you tell me, well, I'm interested to know your thoughts on this, Ben. But off the top of my head, there are all those nuanced communication devices that you could use, like, well, firstly, you've got to listen, right? You've got to understand where they're coming from, which is what we spoke about earlier. In terms of delivering bad news or communicating something that, they don't want to hear, it's all in the way you say it, not just the words you say. So people want to see, generally speaking, that you're being empathetic and kind and understanding. But that's all pretty straightforward. I mean, did you have any thoughts? What do you typically use?
I mean, I'm just thinking around a seller's experience, and I've just heard so many times, and it'll be interesting to hear what other people think on this, but, the agent, I felt pressured by the agent. It's a very, very common thing. I felt like the agent was pressuring me, and I signed on the dotted line because I felt pressured, and, they're in this moment, they're vulnerable because they're going through a huge change in their life. And sometimes it's perfectly valid. I think the agent probably is pressuring someone.
I think that's fair.
I think there will also be occasions, though, where the agent is actually giving really good advice and they are just not necessarily communicating it well or in a way where the person doesn't feel the pressure. And so it just got me thinking on what we were talking about, like how do you do that in a way that doesn't create pressure? And some of the things that I remember from the book was, you label people's emotions.
Oh, yeah.
So it would be the case of, say, you're selling your property and let's say you wanted $1.5 million for it. We have an offer of 1.3. The market's dropping. We've had feedback of 1.2 to 1.3. So in my mind as the agent, I'm going 1.3 is a good offer based on the feedback and all the people who have been coming through the property. There's a whole lot to that, but for simplicity, let's just say that's the situation. Then rather than coming in like a bull and saying, look, you need to take this is a good offer, you need to take this offer where someone's going to feel pressured, the first thing is to label what they might be feeling.
Acknowledging.
And going, I know that this is a stressful situation. I know it's really hard to make a decision. It can be really scary. And maybe you're feeling X, Y, Z about this.
Yeah.
And then they go, okay, they actually understand me.
Yes.
And then you bring in the here's the reasons why the buyer wanted to make this offer. This was their feedback. These are their barriers. Lowering, I think in the book it talked about, and it'd be interesting to hear what you think on this, about like lowering your voice, slowing down, not the whole like I was doing before really fast and excited because that creates this pressure, but it's like slowing down, being calm, deep voice, and delivering.
The labeling thing is great, and now you've reminded me of that. I realize I do use that myself. I find it very effective. The danger of labeling, of course, is that you start projecting, and they'll be like, "No, I'm not finding this scary. Why are you saying that I'm finding this scary?" So you want to be careful with the phrasing of that. So you might say, "I can understand you might be feeling." Or this could
like
be,
or looks like.
Sounds like, which is quite effective. And the lowering of the voice. Yeah, in terms of voice and face, really, one thing I say is that your face should match your message. So if you're expressing concern, if you are in what you're saying, expressing concern for the person that you're with, show it on your face as well, and think about how you can, mirror their emotions with your face. And that's actually something I use in conversation as well, quite deliberately, if I'm being honest. But boy, oh boy, did people just lap it up. I mean, in the right way, because, I want them to know I'm listening, but there are actually things I can do to signal that I am, and exhibiting that on my face is one thing. And certainly the smiling and nodding and the mming, not mming through a straw, just mming, is another way that you can do it as well.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I think that's probably one of the next steps for me on my journey of becoming a better communicator is, using facial expressions more. In fact, I think I had someone say to me the other day, they're like, you should be more, expressive and animated with your face. And now I'm like, oh, now I'll just...
Yeah, it's interesting. And again, this comes back to the authenticity piece. So in some ways, yes, in some ways, you're still you and you...
Yeah.
But I think it's being... The key here is being aware that 100% of the time, whether we like it or not, we are giving off signals. Those signals are, are in what we wear, how we speak, how we hold ourselves, how we make others feel, the extent that we make eye contact, the extent that we smile, how we use it. So all the time we're giving off signals. And as long as you're aware that that's the case and that those signals may have a certain effect, then it's up to you to decide what you do with that. Now, the slightly scary thing is so those signals lead to other people creating or making perceptions, building a perception of you. The slightly scary thing is whether those perceptions are accurate or not is actually irrelevant in the business world. That if they think, so for example, if I just met you, Ben, and I was interacting with you as an agent to go on the piece of feedback that you'd received previously, and I thought, oh, Ben's quite deadpan, he must be not that interested in working with me.
Yeah, right.
Now, whether that's true or not, like you probably are interested in working with me. It's just the way you hold your face.
Yeah.
But that's actually irrelevant that, that you're not that way, but because that's the perception
because that's what
I've
I'm
got.
Communicating to you. Yeah.
And so that will lead me to behave or respond in a certain way.
Which I might not want.
Correct. Yeah. So I think that's just an important thing.
And you can't blame someone else for that.
And you can't blame someone else for that. No, not necessarily.
Because if they expect something, like I'm just thinking in real estate, if you're, and this may not be the case across the board, but if you're, I don't know, selling a mansion or something, maybe there's this more of this expectation, or maybe say you're at an auction. I think that's probably a better example. If you're at an auction, some would argue that you need to know who the real estate agent is, right? Because they're the person representing the property. They're walking around talking to people, helping them with their bidding strategies, things like that. And if they don't stand out from everybody else, who's going to know who the real estate agent is? Especially when they have lots of auctions in one room. But on the flip side, there's this challenge in the industry to become more relatable. So it's like the setting and when you're doing this sort of stuff. And I think everyone has a different opinion. Do I wear a tie? Yeah. Do I wear a suit? Can I get away with a t-shirt? Is a t-shirt professional? I'm wearing one now. Maybe I should be wearing a suit. Be interesting to see what people think. But again, circling back to this idea of, what I'm communicating versus what you are receiving from my communication. This is where I think for me, my personal outlook is how do I improve on what I'm already doing? And, if my facial expressions are relatively flat, which they may be right now, maybe I'll look back in 3 years after doing this and I'll be way more animated. Yeah. But maybe I want to be, Maybe it's because as a child or something, that trauma just set me back,
Yeah.
And it's not to say that's the case, but it's like we don't know unless we explore it, I guess. And for agents who are getting on camera, they're doing this stuff and they're going, oh, that's not me. Maybe it's this idea of exploring how far they can take it to communicate the way they want to.
Yeah.
And I think it's the other thought that's coming to mind is there's a fine line between being authentic and genuine and also manipulating, right? Because I could relate, so say we go back to the negotiation thing. In theory, as an agent, you could put on all the techniques and lower your voice and do all this stuff to manipulate someone into taking an offer, right? I don't want to do that. And as agents, we should never do that. So you could learn the techniques, but it should be to be authentic and to ethical. Communicate genuine and real messages to people so they receive it better and so that you're better at delivering a message, but not so that you can have communication techniques to control and twist them.
That's an excellent point. And the only judge of that can be you, because you know your intentions. So I think it comes back to, you're talking about the fine line between manipulative and being authentic. Although I'm not sure if that's the fine line. The fine line is being.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the right words, but you know what I'm saying, right?
I think it's, I know what you're saying. I think it's the fine line between being manipulative and being effective, almost like getting what you want versus being manipulative. And look, in reality, everyone is operating in the world to get what they want, mostly. Is that a fair comment? Is that a little bit, I mean, you know what I mean? Like you're building a business to, obviously make a difference, but that difference is,
what I think the industry needs, for argument's sake.
Or, okay, maybe I'm generalizing here, but a lot of people are working not necessarily because they really care about their job, but because they want to earn money and they can have a certain lifestyle. My interactions, or people's interactions, are thinking about, not all the time, but, if we met, say, at a networking event, I'd be potentially thinking, okay, who's Ben? What does he do? How might he benefit me? Now, that's not saying my approach, but that is could be
it's a reality.
It's a reality. And look,
the nature of a networking event is to meet people to see if there's some sort of mutual benefit.
Exactly. And it may not be so, it might be not so conscious as a thought like that. It's more underlying. But I think it comes down to motivation. So if you're pressuring someone to buy, to agree to a deal, is it because this is the best deal for them, or is it because you just want to get this thing over the line?
So that you can get paid.
So I think the question of motivation and intention is a key part of that equation. And as I said before, you as an individual are the only one that can answer that. Because everyone's got intentions. I mean.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting idea. It opens up a whole nother topic around, real estate and it being a commission-based industry. Yes. And there's this natural conflict of interest and how do you resolve that? Yeah. But that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah, and probably not something that I can comment on.
Yeah, but it's interesting. And I think there's a lot of things that we've talked about today that agents really have challenges with and overcoming, and especially moving into the digital age. And those ideas around how do you communicate when you're negotiating and how do you overcome nerves and simple things like that. And it'll be interesting to see what people take away from this. But
yeah, this has been I've really enjoyed this. This has been a good chat. It's funny we started with some prompts about what we could talk about. I don't think we even really talked about any of them.
No, I've got about 20 questions here that I'll have to ask you another time.
I know, or we'll have to do a round 2 or something. But I think this is a far more better, more effective way to do it, is just see where the conversation leads.
Exactly.
And that's being authentic then, isn't it?
There you go. Exactly. Couldn't have scripted it if we tried.
Exactly. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for having me, Ben.
No, thanks for coming on, and look forward to the next one.